The Queensland Parliament in Australia just did something amazing. It's not the first state in Australia to do this, but it is the latest one. And I hope what they did spreads to other parts of the world. They passed legislation this week that basically requires anyone, any adult, with knowledge of child sexual abuse to report it to police. You find out a kid is getting abused, you find out another adult is abusing a kid, you now have to tell a law enforcement official. Historically, that's something certain people already had to do. Teachers, doctors, cops, daycare workers, they're all known as mandated reporters. If, for example, a teacher finds out a student is being abused by his or her parents, they have to tell the school social worker or counselor. They have to. They will be fired if they don't, even if the student told them that only because they had a good relationship and the student trusted that the teacher wouldn't tell anyone. Doesn't matter. So what's the big deal now? The new law in Queensland says it also applies to religious leaders who find out about that abuse through a confession. If someone confesses to a religious leader that they've abused a child or they're being abused, the religious leader is now obligated to report that to authorities. Or, more technically and accurately, they are not exempt from the rule that applies to everyone else. If they don't tell authorities about abuse, it could lead to a jail sentence of up to 3 years. Now, you would think everyone would be in support of this. It's never a good sign when you need a law to make people do the obvious. But religious leaders have usually been allowed to avoid these rules, and they don't want that to change. And when I say religious leaders, let's be honest, we are mostly talking about the Catholic Church. So why are they against this? I'll answer that in a moment, but just to give you some background here, in Queensland, the new law actually stems from a 5-year investigation into child sexual abuse by the Australian Royal Commission. In 2017, the Commission issued a final report from their work that included hundreds of recommendations for how Australia could make institutions safer for children. We're talking about things like the government should establish and fund a legal referral service for victims and survivors of abuse. And the government should create an office for child safety, like a cabinet-level position. Another one of their recommendations was making sure religious institutions are not exempt from mandatory reporting. And since that report, a number of Australian states have passed laws to do just that. South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, the Australian Capital Territory, they've all incorporated that suggestion into law. New South Wales and Western Australia have upheld similar laws that they already had on the books. It's exactly how the system ought to work. And now, as of this week, Queensland is joining them. But again, the Catholic Church, as always, was fighting against this bill that protects children. Their argument goes like this: confession is sacred. Whatever you say to a priest in a confessional booth is a secret. That's how it works. That's why it works. You confess your sins, and the priest gives you a path toward forgiveness with the understanding that nothing you say will ever be held against you. Because really, you're just talking to God, and the priest is just a conduit. In fact, priests say they are bound by the seal of confession. They would rather die than tell people what you said to them in confidence. But under this new law, that sanctity of that ritual is no longer a defense for secrecy, especially not when abuse has run rampant within the Catholic Church. Earlier this year, in the capital of Queensland, Brisbane's Catholic Archbishop, Mark Coleridge, tried to stop this legislation from passing. He said the change wouldn't make a bit of difference. He said confessions were mostly anonymous anyway. He said abusers might not even confess to abuse if they thought their secrets might be revealed. In fact, it's the secrecy aspect of confession that allowed people who have done wrong to admit their sins. But the problem with all that is that, first, it doesn't matter if an abuser thinks he's forgiven by God. What matters is if someone confesses that they may do it again, or that they're abusing kids now. If you knew that and you didn't try to stop it, what the hell is the matter with you? What about the argument that if secrecy is not allowed, then some people may not confess? Well, guess what? Then we're right back to square one because it's not like their confession was leading to change. And I don't give a damn about their eternal souls. And you know what? If we are talking about the sort of people who think their sins can be forgiven, then maybe by losing the sanctity of confession, mixed with their apparent fear of hell, it'll prevent them from committing that crime in the future. If they don't think they can be forgiven, then maybe they won't do things that require forgiving. Keeping child abuse secret, when you know the details, can and should be a punishable offense. Now, in Queensland, it will be. Let me give you the worst case scenario version of this, and you can look it up. I am not exaggerating here. There was an Australian priest named Father Michael McArdle who confessed in a confessional booth to molesting children 1,500 times to 30 different priests over the course of 25 years. He admitted that in an affidavit in 2004. He was eventually sentenced to 6 years in jail for a fraction of those crimes, which seems relatively short considering the lifetimes of trauma he inflicted on his victims. But what's mind-boggling is that he was confessing this whole time. All of those priests forgave him and said nothing publicly. McArdle even said the act of confession was, quote, like a magic wand had been waved over me, unquote. Meanwhile, the body count just got higher and higher. Imagine if the first priest he confessed to told authorities about it. Maybe McArdle could have been stopped. That's at least what some of his victims think because they advocated for this legislation, because Michael McArdle worked in central Queensland. Now, I will freely admit that's not a normal case. But how many victims do there have to be before the church says, yeah, okay, we should do something about this? No one has any sympathy for the Catholic Church at this point. They don't get or deserve the benefit of the doubt. It's basically a crime syndicate that lashes out anytime their authority is questioned, even when the only goal is to protect children, like it is here. One lawmaker in Queensland, Stephen Andrew, who was thankfully outnumbered when it came to this law, said the bill was problematic. He said, quote, how confident can the people of Queensland be that they live in a free and open democracy governed by the rule of law where the state jails its bishops, unquote. He said the bill posed a danger for public trust. But really, not passing the bill and letting the church continue to operate as usual is far more dangerous to children. Demanding that priests do the bare minimum to protect kids is not asking much. And there's no rule of law to begin with if religious leaders are allowed to ignore it whenever they feel like it, whatever their reason is. And no one is randomly jailing bishops. Stephen Andrew failed to mention that such priests would only be jailed if it could be proven that they learned about sexual abuse and chose to keep it a secret. Why is that worth protecting? It's not like the law even singles out the Catholic Church, by the way. Everyone has to play by these new rules. Just because you're a religious leader doesn't mean you can commit a crime. At least not anymore. To quote one Australian comedian, quote, the church is fine with laws that protect it from paying tax, but refuses to abide a law designed to protect innocent children from abuse, unquote. I've said this in an older video about the problems with confession, but I think it's worth bringing up again. This whole issue boils down to the question of what should take precedence, religious beliefs or secular law. We've seen this play out in the United States when a Christian pharmacist doesn't want to give a patient birth control because he wrongly thinks it's abortion, even though she has a prescription. Or when a Christian baker won't serve gay customers because selling them the same wedding cake that straight couples can buy would violate his conscience. Your religious freedom ends when you start causing harm to other people who don't share your religious beliefs. No one's saying a priest has to bless a same-sex marriage in church. No one's telling the Catholic Church what they must think about reproductive freedom. But just like a government should be allowed to tell a local business that it can't discriminate against customers, it should be allowed to tell a church that it can't put other people in danger. In case you're wondering, by the way, about half the states in the US have laws requiring priests to report abuse, even if they find out about it in the confessional booth. Many states, though, carve out that exemption for pastors. There's a link in the description with more specifics if you're curious. California is one of those states with an exemption. Whatever a priest hears in the confessional booth is privileged information. But last year, one lawmaker tried to change that. He tried to make sure priests had to report abuse even if they heard it during confession. But after the Catholic Church complained, the bill was watered down. The bill was amended to say that anything told to a priest in a confessional could still remain confidential unless the person confessing to abuse was a clergy member or someone else working in the same building. Then you would have to report it. But if a random stranger confessed to abusing children for the sake of getting their sins absolved, that did not need to be reported. But even then, there was so much opposition to the bill and questions about how it could be enforced that the lawmaker who sponsored it withdrew his own bill. Maybe he'll try again in the future. The Catholic Church's abuse scandal never ended. The movie Spotlight isn't just about what happened decades ago. It's happening now. Even today, the church is protecting predators, whether or not they want to admit it, even if those abusers don't work for the Vatican. At least in Queensland and many other parts of Australia, they will finally be held accountable for their inaction.